Last year, I bought my first 3 rental properties ever, very exciting. And over the last year, these properties have been giving me pretty steady passive cash flow every single month. That being said, it hasn't been all sunshine and roses. I know property investing can be pretty intimidating when you're getting started, but I want you to know it's totally doable if you really set your mind to it. And this is my story on how I made it happen. I'm gonna share with you how I first decided on which part of the US to buy in the first place. I'll also talk about sort of which metrics I looked at and what were the criteria to determine whether something was a good deal or not. And I will also talk about why I actually took action on these deals and pulled the trigger versus waiting for better market conditions or just kicking the can down the road. And finally, I'll also talk about how I set everything up once I bought the properties, including getting it rented, finding a property manager, and getting the right insurance. Okay, so the first step is obviously to decide where are you going to buy? Where are you gonna start looking for deals? And for me, I wanted to sort of stick to something that I was familiar with. So the first choice in my mind was New York City, because I know that area. I grew up there, I spent my 20s there. The problem with New York City though is all the properties are extremely expensive. I would say minimum $500,000 to $1 million just to even play. And not only that, New York City is one of those cities where prices are very high and rents just don't justify if you wanna do like an investment. And that's actually the case with a lot of these big major metropolitan cities. And not that you can't find good deals in these cities, but you're just gonna have to look a lot harder. So I say just make it easy on yourself and go to a different part of the US. And so to give you some context, I ended up buying my properties in Las Vegas. And I will explain how I got there. Basically, it all started in 2020. I had heard of a friend who invested in Texas in like the Dallas area, and he was doing really well. I mean, there wasn't really any systematic process to this. I just heard of this area that worked. So I went online and I started researching Dallas on places like Bigger Pockets. They have this big online forum where all kinds of real estate people post questions and help each other and answer each other's questions. So I was thinking, all right, I'm gonna go to Dallas. I'll just start diving in and learning about the area and just trying to meet people. So I sent a couple messages to people through Bigger Pockets and asked them like, hey, I'm interested in investing in this area. Are there any meetups I can go to? Or is there anyone you can introduce me to? Or would you be willing to talk to me? I was gonna carve out 2 to 4 weeks to spend in Dallas to get to know people and drive around and just see what was going on there. I had just moved into a camper van at the time, so my plan was to do a road trip to Texas and just camp out there for a month to get this project going. However, I had a lot of stuff going on in my life, business and personal, and I ended up not being able to carve out that time, and all the people that I reached out to, I never followed up with them. So long story short, a couple of months went by, this project was left on the wayside, but then I was doing a road trip with my camper van through Las Vegas. And this is so funny, it's so random, but I had a Bumble date set up with someone in Las Vegas. We ended up hitting it off as friends, and he ended up being a real estate broker, and he even owned a few rental properties himself. So we ended up chatting about it, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. It actually seems like Vegas could be the place where I invest. And through talking to him, I realized that a lot of the properties that you could buy here, the numbers worked. In other words, the rent was enough to cover all of your expenses and your mortgage payment and leave you with some positive cash flow. I also learned other things that I didn't know about, like landlord-tenant laws. In Vegas, the laws are pretty favorable towards landlords. So the landlord-tenant laws in the region you're planning to invest in can make a difference. Something else I learned was Vegas has quite low property taxes compared to the Dallas, Texas area, where property taxes, I believe, can run up to $10,000 a year. Don't quote me on that, but I heard they're quite high. And in Vegas, none of my properties have more than $1,000 of property tax per year. And of course, at the time, the median home price of things you could buy in Vegas weren't like crazy sky high yet. You could get stuff for like $200,000, maybe even less, and maybe maximum $400,000. So it just made sense. And last but not least, I had learned that in the last decade or so, Las Vegas had really diversified its economy, because after 2008, when Vegas just completely became a ghost town after the financial crisis because tourism stopped, Vegas really had nothing to keep its economy going. But now in 2023, it turns out that Vegas has done a lot to diversify its economy. So the source of jobs and therefore the source of employment for your future tenants is not just dependent on one industry. There's now like tech startups, there's a lot of like medical stuff going on in Vegas. It's not just tourism. So these are the kinds of things that I learned just by having a real conversation with someone who was doing it, this broker that I met in Vegas. So anyway, I ended up investing in Vegas, but at the end of the day, you can find good deals and regions and areas that make sense in any part of the US. I just sort of jumped on Las Vegas because I was already there. It was just convenient, just made sense. But I think the key here is to pick a place and then go visit and talk to real life people in person, because you're gonna learn so many things just by having real conversations. That's exactly what happened to me. All right, and now in terms of how to find good deals, this is sort of the mathy part, but number crunching when it comes to looking at real estate investment deals is really not hard at all. It's just basic addition and subtraction. I'm gonna walk you through it in a second. But first, in order to find deals, you need to first hire a broker. So I would say that's the first step. Just reach out to brokers in the area and have them start bringing you deals. Tell them what you're looking for. Tell them you're looking for an investment property, that you want a yield on your money. I'll get into that in a second. And just develop a good relationship with them, because the broker has multiple clients and often they have more clients than they have deals, like good deals. So when a bargain deal comes up, they see it, they're gonna probably call their favorite client to give it to them first, or to the client that they know is gonna come through and not just leave them high and dry. Real estate, I'm finding it's really all about the people that you know and having the right team, the right people around you that you trust and that trust you back. So in my case, I learned that single family homes are the easiest to rent out. They're just sort of the bread and butter, kind of all across America, really. So I was looking for single family homes specifically. I also told my broker that I wanted to make at least like 6% yield on my money. So these are some of the criteria I gave him. He sent me a couple of deals over the course of 2 weeks. I think we actually went and looked at 10 properties in person, but he sent me a lot more to look at online. And these are the numbers that I crunched. First, you need to figure out what is the rent I could get if I bought this property and rented it out. And that really depends on how many bedrooms there are. Is there a pool? Like, what sort of amenities are there? So figure out the rent. And then of course, the next step is you need to calculate all the expenses that you would be paying out of pocket once you receive that rent. And the first and foremost biggest expense is obviously your mortgage payment. You can always go on like bankrate.com or just look up a mortgage payment calculator, and then you can calculate, if I put 20% down on this property, if interest rates are at this percent, what would my monthly mortgage payment be? The calculator will tell you. The next expense line item to calculate is HOA fees. A lot of single family homes don't have HOA fees, but if it does, you want to factor that in. That's like the monthly fee that you pay to the community to maintain sort of the common areas. The next expense is insurance. For my properties, it was around $800 a year. And then property manager, because the whole point of investing in rentals is to create financial freedom and passive income. It's not to buy yourself another job. So you really need to factor in the cost of having someone else manage the investment for you. So property manager, that's usually gonna be anywhere from 5 to 10% of the rent. And then of course there is property taxes. You can find that out by looking on the city or state government website. Oh, and I forgot, of course, one of the most important things is maintenance and repairs, because do not kid yourself, there will be maintenance and repair costs once you buy the property. Just check out this video if you want to hear more about that. And then the difference is your monthly cash flow. I will say the only unpredictable one is maintenance and repairs. This is sort of where it might be a bit challenging for beginners, which is why I really recommend just going for properties that are in good condition. So yeah, you're looking for properties that won't require a lot of maintenance. Okay, and now here is the important part. Once you have that monthly cash flow, like dollar amount, you multiply that by 12 to get an annual number, and then you divide that by the down payment that you paid, or that you would pay. And that will give you a percentage or what you call a yield. The higher the yield, the better, because it means your investment is taking you further with a lot of annual income. It's similar to dividend yield in stocks, but basically you just want this to be as high as possible. So I went through the calculation a little quickly on this video, but if you want my actual spreadsheet calculator that I use to find my Vegas rental properties, as well as a little video tutorial on how to calculate each of the numbers, where to find each of those numbers, and where I just go over everything in a lot more detail, then check out this free resource that I've created for you. I'll link to it below in the description. It's completely free. I was actually really nervous, and I doubted myself a lot before closing on these properties. I was like, okay, the numbers look like they make sense, but am I missing something here? Is there really a real estate bubble and it's gonna crash? But here's how I kind of talked myself through it and ended up pulling the trigger. One is that I know that I need to invest my money. Otherwise, it's just gonna sit in a bank account and it's gonna lose value to inflation every year anyway, and that's also not gonna be good either. I also knew that I'm a busy person. Like, I found these now, I invested the time now, and these are in front of me now. So it's like now or never. Another thing is, as long as the rent covers the mortgage payment, then even if there is a housing crash, and the value of my house goes down, as long as I can keep up the monthly mortgage payment, I could just hold on to it and ride it out, you know? So I'm thinking long term, and so I thought with all these reasons, there's really no reason not to, and if I don't pull the trigger on this, literally the only reason that I'd have is fear. And I wasn't gonna let that stop me. So rather than trying to time the market and find the perfect time to buy, just find a deal where the numbers will make sense even if the price goes down, because at least the monthly cash flow is still there, then just go for it. And I'm really glad that I did, because I have learned so much in the time that I bought these properties, stuff that I could never have learned by reading more books or going through all the Bigger Pockets forums or just reading stuff online. At some point, action is what brings the clarity, and if you just wait to feel ready before ever taking action, you might find that you never end up taking action. And finally, now I want to talk a bit about what happened after I bought these properties. So the first step, obviously, was to find a renter. One of the 3 houses already came with a tenant, so that was pretty convenient. But I thought, you know what, a property manager is much better qualified to find a good tenant for me. That's what they do. So I knew my first task was to find a property manager. Now, I have a couple suggestions for how you can find a property manager. The first is through the National Association of Residential Property Managers, NARPM.org or .com. I'll link to it below, but they have a database of property managers who are licensed and have this certification. So that's one way to go through a list of vetted property managers in your area. And so once you get a couple of options for property managers, interview them, meet them in person if you can, just to get a feel for who they are, and ask them how many units they manage, how much experience they have, how many years they've been doing this, and what's their process for tenants who don't pay. Just ask them a lot of questions. I think one really important thing is ask them if they own any investment properties themselves, because then they really know what it's like to be in a landlord's shoes. That is probably the most important quality in a property manager. Like, how can they really do a good job for you if they've never been in your shoes? So all that being said, I didn't even follow my own advice. I did not interview 3 property managers. I ended up getting really lucky because on the closing documents for one of my houses, the contact info for the property manager for the owner who previously owned that house was there. So I called them and said, hey, I'm the new owner of this property that you manage. Can we have a chat? And so we met in person, and I realized, oh, they're like good people. They're first and foremost real estate investors themselves. They've been doing this for years and years and years. I could tell that I could trust them. So I asked them for their property management agreement, which is a contract that lays out how you guys are gonna work together and what their fees are. And I did spot check that against other property management fees just to see like that they were in line with market rates. And then I went ahead with them. Now, as for insurance, very, very important. But basically, when it comes to insurance, don't be afraid to grill the insurance agent about what happens if, say, a fire happens, or if somebody robs the house and like trashes it. What happens financially? How much is the insurance gonna cover? What's gonna be my out of pocket? What's the deductible? Just like grill them on all the numbers and ask them to give you these scenarios in writing, like via email, so that it's crystal clear. I made the mistake of going through someone that I just found on Google, no references, and she ended up being kind of inexperienced, and she sold me a weird policy called an ACV policy. Again, check out this video for more information about that and how that affected me. But basically, you need to have good insurance. Make sure you get what's called a total replacement cost policy instead of an actual cash value policy. Because a total replacement cost policy, if something happens to your house, you will be made whole. The other policy, not so much. So make sure you have good insurance in place. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Okay, last but not least, once I found my property manager, it was time to get these properties rented. My property manager handled it. However, there's one really interesting thing that I learned in the process where one of these houses were pretty outdated. It was ugly. Like personally, I would not have wanted to live there. I would want to renovate the kitchen and the bathroom and redo all the floors because there were like 6 different types of flooring in this house. And what I learned was that the landlord mindset is really different from like a homeowner mindset. Like if you're buying a home to live in it, you want it to look beautiful. But when it comes to being a landlord, if it will rent, then there's no need to renovate or touch it at all. I mean, you want to have a house where the tenants can live comfortably, but in terms of like cosmetic stuff, you really just have to be very practical. And so that property, in about 2-3 weeks, it got rented just as is, and I didn't have to spend a dime. So that was a really important, valuable lesson in like the investor landlord mindset. So there was a whole whirlwind of stuff to do in those 2 to 3 months where I was closing on the properties and later setting them up. But once they were all up and running, it was actually very passive. Like every month I started getting these deposits in my account and very few calls from my property manager. Maybe like once every 2 or 3 months they'll call me and be like, hey, this laundry machine broke down, like do you want to pay $200 to repair it or get them a new one? Like they'll ask me kind of high level management questions like that, but for the most part I just like sit back and collect this money. So that was really cool because it's like you always hear about how this can work, but when it's actually working for you, you're like, oh my God, holy shit, this rental passive income is a real thing. So that's the story of how I got started in rental property investing. As you can see, I just jumped head first, like I had a crash course, and I'm definitely going to wait a few years until I purchase my next rental property, just in case any more expensive, unexpected lessons come up. But my plan is to eventually buy more properties and maybe even one day trade up for like a bigger apartment building with like 50 units or something like that. I think the biggest takeaway here is if you really want to do this for yourself, like pick a location and just jump in. Start having real conversations. Don't stay stuck in that analysis paralysis phase because the learning really starts when you actually start taking action. You learn by doing. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll either make another video about it or I'll just answer in the comments. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.